President Donald Trump has announced a trade deal with Japan that he said will result in Japan investing $550 billion into the United States.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the U.S. has reached a trade deal with Japan. Trump says the agreement will see Japan invest $550 billion in the country.
Japanese goods will now be facing tariffs of some 15%. That's instead of the 25% tariff.
U.S. President Donald Trump says the U.S. has reached a trade deal with Japan. Trump says the agreement will see Japan invest $550 billion in the country. President Donald Trump has announced a trade deal with Japan that he said will result in Japan investing $550 billion into the United States. Japanese goods will now be facing tariffs of some 15%. That is instead of the 25% tariff. The cameras were still flashing when Donald Trump stepped to the podium, beaming with pride. He called it the biggest trade deal in American history. Reporters scribbled furiously as he announced the number, $550 billion, signed, sealed, and supposedly secured. It was meant to be a crowning moment, proof that his hardline tariff strategy was forcing allies to invest directly in America. But only weeks later, that victory began to unravel spectacularly. Tokyo suddenly pulled the plug. On live national television, Japan's new prime minister tore up the deal, calling it a threat to our national interest. What began as a photo op at the White House had morphed into a diplomatic earthquake. According to Reuters, Japan's finance ministry flatly refused to transfer even a single dollar until Washington gave up control over how the money would be used. The yen tumbled, Wall Street panicked, and the White House seethed. Because this was not just Japan saying no. It was Asia sending a message, enough. And behind that message lurked a question now echoing through every capital in the Pacific. Has America finally lost control of its closest allies? On October 1, 2025, Japan's chief negotiator, Ryo Akazawa, stepped before the cameras and publicly denied that Washington would have exclusive discretion over Japan's pledged funds. Tokyo, he said, would retain project selection power through its own development bank. The statement may have sounded procedural, but politically it was a direct challenge to Washington's authority. Within hours, markets sensed trouble. Analysts realized the Trump-Japan partnership framework unveiled only months earlier might not survive its first quarter. Trump had revealed the accord with full fanfare in July 2025, standing on the White House lawn surrounded by American automakers and energy executives. He described it as the largest trade accord ever signed. The agreement, he claimed, would lower tariffs on Japanese exports from 27.5% to 15% while directing hundreds of billions of dollars from Japanese investors into U.S. industries, shipbuilding, liquefied natural gas, semiconductors, and energy infrastructure. According to Bloomberg, Trump boasted that America will pocket 90% of the profits. The optics looked triumphant. Yet behind the smiles, negotiators on both sides privately warned that the framework was legally flimsy and dangerously one-sided. It was not a formal treaty and just a political understanding open to interpretation. Inside Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party, backlash was swift. Then Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba had signed the deal under months of tariff threats from Washington. By September, as reported by the Financial Times, his approval ratings collapsed below 20% amid claims he had surrendered Japan's fiscal independence. When he resigned, critics called his final act less diplomacy than capitulation. Enter Sanai Takaichi, sworn in on October 4, 2025 as Japan's first female prime minister. She won the party leadership by vowing to re-examine unfair commitments. The Wall Street Journal described her rise as a conservative reset, echoing the worldview of her mentor, the late Shinzo Abe, hawkish on defense, skeptical of Beijing, yet fiercely protective of Japanese sovereignty. In her first televised address, Takaichi declared that any deal undermining Japan's national interest would be reviewed. Those few words froze Washington's optimism. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, the architect of Trump's trade framework, told reporters that the United States expects all partners to fulfill their commitments. Behind closed doors, however, Treasury officials worried that Tokyo might reroute its promised capital through domestic channels instead of sending it directly to U.S. agencies. Reuters later confirmed those fears. Japan was setting up a state-backed investment facility within the Japan Bank for International Cooperation to oversee the funds, effectively keeping control in Tokyo's hands. Markets reacted instantly. The yen briefly strengthened on speculation that Japan would slow the dollar transfers, while shares of U.S. defense contractors, prime beneficiaries of the deal, fell nearly 6%. The Financial Times interpreted the move as a quiet revolt against Washington's economic coercion. Then the pattern spread in Seoul, South Korea. The city faced similar pressure. It had signed a $350 billion framework promising tariff relief in exchange for investment. But after Japan's defiance, Seoul's national security advisor told Reuters, "We are not able to pay $350 billion in cash." Trump had insisted that payments be made up front. South Korea flatly denied any such obligation. Asia, it seemed, was no longer following Washington's script. Upon returning to the United States, former President Trump expressed his frustrations during a televised cabinet meeting, stating emphatically, "We made the best deal ever, and Japan's already walking away." This comment underscored his administration's ongoing commitment to pushing for favorable trade agreements. In a bid to solidify and expand U.S. economic interests, the administration doubled down on its efforts. Bloomberg News further reported that Howard Lutnick, a key advisor, took the initiative to establish a new U.S. investment accelerator. This federal office was tasked with strategically determining how allied capital could be effectively allocated. Its focus areas included crucial sectors such as energy terminals in Alaska, which are essential for the country's energy independence, and advanced semiconductor manufacturing plants in the Midwest, pivotal for technological innovation and national security. The catch: foreign governments would get only a 45-day consultation window and no voting power. For Tokyo, that was unacceptable. On October 1st, Akazawa reminded reporters that Japan's contribution falls within the range where there will be no foreign exchange impact. It was a diplomatic warning that Tokyo alone would control the pace and volume of any disbursement. Currency desks understood the message. Japan could stall the entire process indefinitely. This outcome stunned Washington. The Trump administration had expected Japan's conservative leadership to be its most dependable ally. Instead, the country once central to the Indo-Pacific Alliance was now resisting America's most ambitious economic initiative in Asia. The relationship had already been strained. In the early 2020s, when Trump reinstated 25% reciprocal tariffs on imported autos, Japan had responded with rare defiance. Then, Prime Minister Ishiba declared, "Tokyo will not be taken advantage of." That defiance laid the groundwork for today's confrontation. Under Takaichi's leadership, the political landscape shifted dramatically, transforming resistance to Washington's directives from a potential political liability into a rallying point for her supporters. Her constituents held a deep respect for the long-standing alliance with the United States. Still, they were increasingly vocal about their discontent with any agreements that placed Japan in a subordinate role. According to reports from Nikkei Asia, Takaichi's strategic approach focused on achieving a strategic balance. This involved not only fortifying defense cooperation with U.S. forces to ensure national security, but also advocating for Japan's independence and standing in international trade and investment negotiations. By promoting a vision of equality and mutual benefit, Takaichi sought to redefine the terms of Japan's partnership with the U.S., making it clear that while Japan valued its alliance, it would not accept terms that undermined its sovereignty. Her advisors argued that Japan's post-war role, subordinate to American power, had to evolve into a genuine partnership. But the economic stakes remained enormous. The White House estimated that the Japan framework could create 700,000 U.S. jobs and revive industries hollowed out by globalization. Shipyards in Alabama and Texas had already been promised contracts worth billions. Bloomberg quoted Lutnick saying the plan would reindustrialize America without spending taxpayer money. For Donald Trump, it served as clear evidence that tariffs were an effective tool for shaping the economy and leveraging trade negotiations in favor of the United States. On the other hand, Japan's economists viewed the situation as a looming fiscal disaster. A confidential report from the finance ministry referenced by the Asahi Shimbun cautioned that the massive redirection of financial resources overseas could significantly undermine domestic investment, further escalating fiscal risks for the country. With Japan's national debt already exceeding an alarming 260% of its gross domestic product (GDP), even seemingly minor symbolic financial transfers of such magnitude could trigger instability in the bond markets and create apprehension among investors. The potential repercussions on Japan's economy could reverberate globally, highlighting the interconnectedness of international financial systems. Corporate voices in Japan were growing increasingly restless amid discussions on international trade. Takashi Nainami, the CEO of Suntory and the head of the influential business federation, Kizei Doyakai, expressed his concerns to the Financial Times regarding Japan's decision to agree to full tariff exemptions. He characterized this move as a significant strategic blunder that could have lasting repercussions on the nation's economy. Nainami emphasized that while the American framework for trade appeared appealing on the surface, it suffered from a lack of transparency. Specifically, there was little clarity regarding which projects Japan would be financially backing or the expected returns on its investments. His frustration underscored a brewing discontent within Tokyo's business circles. Many believe that Japan had committed to impressive financial figures without establishing a coherent governance plan or a roadmap for oversight. This sentiment reflects a growing awareness among corporate leaders of the need for more transparency and accountability in international agreements to safeguard Japan's economic interests. Meanwhile, the deal's flagship venture, the $44 billion Alaska LNG export terminal, was already bogged down. Reuters reported in late September that Japanese utilities doubted their profitability, citing spiraling construction costs and weak long-term demand. One industry executive privately admitted all the Japanese want is to stall and get out. Trump's advisors pushed back, arguing that Japan would benefit indirectly through energy security and geopolitical alignment. But even American analysts were skeptical. Christopher Johnston, Japan chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, told Politico that the framework was more official than what they had before, but less official than a formal trade agreement. In short, it sat in legal limbo, enforceable only through political will. By October, the cracks widened. Japan abruptly canceled a planned trade delegation to Washington after discovering errors in the U.S. tariff implementation orders. Akazawa demanded a corrected executive proclamation. The White House refused. According to the Associated Press, that cancellation disrupted what Trump had hoped would be a victory tour across allied capitals. Across the Pacific, financial commentators began asking a bigger question. Was Washington's coercive trade model driving allies away faster than Beijing ever could? The Wall Street Journal observed that while China extends influence through loans, Trump was testing the opposite. Influence through tariff intimidation. Inside Takaichi's cabinet, options were hotly debated. Should Japan comply and face domestic outrage, renegotiate and risk retaliatory tariffs, or delay indefinitely and test Trump's patience? Each path carried a serious risk. Analysts at Nomura Securities estimated that Japan could legally stretch payments over a decade without breaching commitments, effectively neutralizing the political pressure while keeping diplomatic channels open. Washington noticed. Lutnick warned that delays will have consequences, hinting at the return of punitive tariffs, but the credibility of such threats was uncertain. The U.S. manufacturing lobby, once enthusiastic about Trump's plan, now feared another round of trade turbulence. One executive told the Financial Times, "We wanted investment, not a new Cold War with our best customer." One thing is clear. The stage that began as a victory parade for Washington has turned into a referendum on American dominance itself. The outcome will not just shape the next trade cycle. It could determine the very balance of influence across the Pacific for a generation. And as this drama unfolds, every headline, every currency fluctuation, and every press conference tells the same story. America's allies are no longer automatically aligned. They are asserting independence, and the era of unquestioned U.S. economic command may finally be over. So as the yen wobbles, the markets hold their breath and diplomats scramble behind closed doors. One question remains. Has Japan's quiet defiance marked the beginning of a new Asian century? One where Washington's word is no longer law. If you found this analysis insightful, make sure to like, subscribe, and check out our next deep dive video exploring how shifting alliances are redrawing the global map of power and trade. The United States and Japan has been a cornerstone of post-World War II geopolitics, with Japan serving as a key ally in the Asia-Pacific region. Under the U.S.-Japan Security Treaty, America provides military protection, while Japan hosts U.S. bases and supports regional stability. However, economic relations have often been contentious, with trade imbalances and tariff disputes dating back decades. In the late 20th century, U.S. concerns over Japanese auto imports led to voluntary export restraints, and in more recent years, the Trans-Pacific Partnership was negotiated but later abandoned by the U.S. under Trump. Trump's first term saw the imposition of tariffs on steel and aluminum, citing national security, which strained ties but also prompted negotiations. The 2025 Framework Agreement was positioned as a breakthrough, combining tariff reductions with massive investment commitments. But as we have seen, the devil is in the details, and the lack of binding legal mechanisms has exposed vulnerabilities. Let us explore the economic motivations behind Japan's initial agreement. Japan, facing demographic challenges with an aging population and low birth rates, has long sought to export capital to secure returns abroad. With domestic investment opportunities limited by stagnation, Japanese pension funds and corporations have poured trillions into foreign assets, including U.S. treasuries and real estate. The $550 billion pledge, while enormous, aligns with Japan's surplus savings and desire for stable, high-yield projects. However, the condition that the U.S. controls project selection raised red flags, as it could lead to investments in politically favored but economically questionable ventures, potentially yielding low returns for Japanese stakeholders. This concern is amplified by Japan's massive public debt, as mentioned, over 260% of GDP, the highest in the developed world. Any misallocation of funds could exacerbate fiscal pressures, especially if it diverts resources from domestic priorities like disaster resilience or technological innovation. Now, turning to the political dynamics in Japan. Shigeru Ishiba's resignation was not solely due to the trade deal, but it played a significant role in eroding his support. Ishiba, known for his defense expertise, had prioritized strengthening ties with the U.S. to counter China, but critics argued he conceded too much economically. His approval ratings plummeting below 20% reflected broader dissatisfaction with the Liberal Democratic Party's handling of economic issues, including inflation and wage stagnation. Sanai Takaichi's ascent represents a shift toward a more nationalist conservatism. As a protege of Shinzo Abe, she embodies his Abenomics legacy of monetary easing, fiscal stimulus, and structural reforms, but with a stronger emphasis on sovereignty. Her vow to review unfair commitments resonates with voters wary of U.S. dominance, especially in light of past disputes over base relocations in Okinawa or intellectual property rights. Takaichi's gender also adds a layer of symbolism, breaking the glass ceiling in a society where women remain underrepresented in leadership, though her policies are more focused on traditional values than progressive feminism. On the U.S. side, the framework is part of Trump's broader America First agenda, aiming to reshore manufacturing and reduce trade deficits. The $550 billion is touted as a win for workers in Rust Belt states, with investments in semiconductors addressing vulnerabilities exposed by supply chain disruptions during the pandemic. The Alaska LNG project, for instance, is seen as bolstering energy exports to Asia, reducing dependence on Russian gas amid ongoing geopolitical tensions. However, critics in the U.S., including some economists, question the feasibility, noting that forced investments may not be efficient and could lead to cronyism in project allocation. Howard Lutnick's role as Commerce Secretary is pivotal here. As a Wall Street veteran, he brings financial acumen to the table, but his push for a U.S.-led investment accelerator has been criticized as overreach, granting the executive branch unprecedented control over foreign funds. This raises constitutional questions about separation of powers and could invite legal challenges from Congress or affected states. Moreover, the 45-day consultation window for foreign governments is viewed as insufficient, potentially violating principles of fair dealing in international law. Let us consider the ripple effects on other allies. South Korea's similar framework, with $350 billion pledged, faces parallel scrutiny. Seoul, already navigating tensions with North Korea and China, cannot afford economic instability. The National Security Advisor's statement denying upfront cash payments signals a coordinated Asian response, perhaps emboldened by Japan's stance. This could extend to Australia, India, and others in the Quad Alliance, testing the cohesion of U.S.-led initiatives against Chinese influence. Beijing, meanwhile, watches with interest, potentially exploiting divisions through its Belt and Road investments, which offer more flexible terms albeit with strings attached. Market reactions provide another lens. The yen's tumble and strengthening reflect currency traders' bets on delayed transfers impacting exchange rates. A weaker yen benefits Japanese exporters but hurts importers and consumers, fueling inflation. U.S. defense stocks dropping 6% highlights investor concerns over reduced funding for military projects, which were part of the deal's strategic component. Broader indices like the Dow and Nikkei have shown volatility, with analysts warning of a potential trade war redux if tariffs escalate. Nomura's estimate of stretching payments over a decade is plausible given the non-binding nature of the agreement, allowing Japan to comply in letter while defying in spirit. Looking ahead, the upcoming meetings between Trump and Takaichi will be crucial. Trump's visit to Tokyo, as hinted in reports, could either mend fences or escalate tensions. Possible outcomes include a revised framework with shared oversight, partial fulfillment to save face, or retaliatory measures like reimposing 25% tariffs, which would hurt both economies. For Japan, domestic politics add pressure, with opposition parties like the Constitutional Democratic Party calling for transparency and parliamentary oversight. Business leaders like Takashi Nainami represent a powerful lobby, advocating for deals that ensure returns and align with corporate strategies. Suntory, as a global player, exemplifies Japan's shift toward diversified investments beyond US-centric ones. The Alaska LNG terminal's troubles underscore project-specific risks. With costs spiraling due to labor shortages and environmental regulations, Japanese utilities skepticism is rational. Weak demand stems from the global transition to renewables, where LNG's role is transitional at best. This flagship project's fate could symbolize the deal's overall viability. Geopolitically, this episode questions U.S. hegemony. Post-war, America shaped the international order through institutions like the IMF and WTO, but Trump's transactional approach prioritizes bilateral leverage. Allies asserting independence, as Japan does here, may signal a multipolar shift, where middle powers negotiate harder. For Asia, this could herald greater regional integration, perhaps through frameworks like CPTPP or RCEP, reducing reliance on U.S. markets. In conclusion, this trade drama encapsulates broader themes of sovereignty, economic interdependence, and power shifts. While the immediate focus is on the $550 billion, the long-term implications touch on alliance durability, market stability, and global governance. As diplomats negotiate and markets adjust, the world watches whether compromise prevails or confrontation escalates. This narrative, grounded in the unfolding events, highlights the complexities of modern international relations, where economic tools are as potent as military ones. For more insights into global trade dynamics, stay tuned for our upcoming analyses on similar developments in Europe and Latin America, where similar tensions are brewing. Remember, in an interconnected world, one nation's defiance can reshape alliances for years to come. Let us now reflect on the human element behind these headlines. The executives in shipyards awaiting contracts, the farmers in Japan worried about domestic investment cuts, the policymakers balancing national pride with pragmatic needs, all are affected by these high-level decisions. Trade deals are not just numbers on paper, they impact lives, livelihoods, and legacies. Donald Trump's boast of the biggest deal ever now faces the test of implementation, while Sanai Takaichi's bold stance could define her premiership. As October progresses, expect more twists, with potential announcements from joint press conferences or leaked memos fueling speculation. Analysts predict that if Japan holds firm, other nations may follow suit, challenging the efficacy of tariff-based diplomacy. Conversely, if a deal is salvaged, it could validate Trump's strategy, encouraging similar approaches with the EU or Canada. The role of media in shaping perceptions cannot be understated, with outlets like Reuters and Bloomberg providing real-time updates that sway markets and public opinion. In Japan, the Asahi Shimbun's reference to the Finance Ministry report adds domestic pressure, while in the US, Politico's interviews with think tank experts offer critical perspectives. This multifaceted story continues to evolve, reminding us that in global affairs, nothing is ever truly signed, sealed, and delivered until the funds flow and benefits materialize. To wrap up this extended exploration, consider the broader lessons. Nations must balance alliances with autonomy, economics with politics, and short-term gains with long-term stability. Japan's quiet defiance, as we call it, may indeed mark a pivotal moment, signaling that even the closest allies demand equal footing in the 21st century. Thank you for joining this deep dive into one of the most significant trade stories of 2025.